The key did not exist on any ring in the house. 19-year-old Wren Ashby had cleaned every room at Calderwood Manor for nearly a year. She had learned the weight of every door, the particular creak of every floorboard, the precise number of seconds it took for the morning light to cross the long gallery in summer and in winter. She knew the house the way you know the back of your own hand, without thinking, without needing to look. Except for one door. It sat at the end of the third-floor corridor, behind a velvet rope that had faded from deep blue to the color of an old bruise. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pratt, had told her on her first day that the room belonged to the late Duchess, that it had been locked since her death 11 years ago, and that no one was to go near it. Wren had not gone near it. Not until the Thursday morning a single brass key arrived in an envelope addressed to her in handwriting she did not recognize, with no note, no explanation, and no indication of who had sent it. Just the key, and on the back of the envelope, 4 words written in faded ink: "For when you are ready." Before Wren opens that door, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If a mysterious key arrived in your name with no explanation except the words, "For when you are ready," would you use it, or would you leave the door locked? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy historical mysteries, hidden identities, and unforgettable Duke romances, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Now, let's see what was waiting behind that door. Wren Ashby had come to Calderwood Manor 11 months earlier with a single trunk, a letter of recommendation from the rectory where she had grown up, and very little else. She had been raised by the Reverend Thomas Ashby and his wife Margaret in the village of Linmere, a small parish on the edge of the Calderwood estate. The Reverend had found her, this was the story she had always been told, as an infant left at the rectory door in a winter night with nothing but a blanket and a small silver locket pinned inside it. The locket contained no portrait, no name, just a single engraved initial on the inside of the clasp, worn nearly smooth by 18 years of being held. The letter W. It was, the Reverend had always said with a kind smile, simply how they had decided on her name, Wren. Small, plain, and resilient, a bird that survived English winters that killed larger things. She had grown up loved, if not wealthy. The Reverend and his wife had both passed within a year of each other when Wren was 17, leaving her with the locket, a small annuity that covered very little, and the need to find work. Calderwood Manor, the seat of the Duke of Calderwood, had been hiring downstairs staff. Wren had walked the 4 miles from Linmere with her trunk on a hired cart, and had been interviewed by Mrs. Pratt in the housekeeper's small office off the kitchen corridor. "Can you keep silent?" Mrs. Pratt had asked. "Yes, ma'am," Wren had said. "Can you work without being seen?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." Mrs. Pratt had looked at her for a moment longer than the questions required. Then she had said, "You may start on Monday." Wren had not thought anything of that look, not then. The Duke of Calderwood was named Alaric Vane. He was 31 years old, tall, with dark hair that he kept cropped close, and eyes the color of a winter sea, gray-green, restless, and very rarely turned toward anyone for longer than courtesy required. He had never married. This was a subject of considerable discussion in the village and considerable silence in the house. Wren had gathered, in the way that servants gather everything, through fragments, through the corners of conversations, through the things people did not quite finish saying, that the Duke had been engaged once, many years ago, to a woman who died before the wedding could take place. No one said her name. Wren had seen the Duke a pair of dozen times in 11 months. He passed through the servants' areas rarely, and when their paths crossed in a corridor, he gave the same small nod he gave every member of staff, polite, distant, entirely impersonal.
except once. 3 months into her employment, Wren had been carrying a stack of linens up the main staircase, a task she should not have been doing, but the upstairs maid was ill and someone had to do it, and the Duke had been coming down. They had nearly collided on the landing. He had stopped. He had looked at her, really looked, the way people rarely looked at downstairs staff, and something in his face had gone very still, for just a moment, long enough that Wren had felt the need to apologize, though she was not sure for what. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she had said, stepping aside. He had not moved for another second. Then he had said, quite quietly, "What is your name?" "Wren, Your Grace, Wren Ashby." He had nodded. He had continued down the stairs. He had not looked back. But Wren, climbing the rest of the way with her arms full of linens, had felt something settle over her that she could not name. The particular sensation of being looked at by someone who expected to see something else and had not been entirely able to hide that they had not. She had not thought much more about it, until the key arrived. Wren did not open the door immediately. She carried the key in her apron pocket for 3 days, turning it over with her fingers during quiet moments, feeling its weight, its age, the worn grooves where a hand other than her own had held it many times before.
On the 4th day, a Thursday, the day she cleaned the 3rd-floor corridor, she stood in front of the locked door for a long time before she used it. The corridor was empty. The velvet rope hung slack across the doorway, faded and soft with age. Beyond the door, she knew, was a room that had not been opened in 11 years. A room that belonged, by every rule of the house, to a dead woman. She lifted the rope. She fitted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as though it had been oiled recently, as though someone had wanted to make certain that whenever this moment came, the door would open without resistance. The room beyond was dim, the curtains drawn, but even in the half-light, Wren could see that it had been kept, not abandoned, not left to dust and decay the way old rooms in old houses usually were, but kept. The furniture was polished, the bed was made. A vase on the dressing table held flowers that, though wilted, could not have been more than a week old. Someone came in here, regularly, for 11 years. Wren stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The room was a bedroom, clearly a woman's, clearly once well-loved. A dressing table with a silver mirror, a wardrobe of pale wood, a writing desk beneath the window, its surface clear except for a single framed portrait. Wren crossed to it. The portrait was of a young woman, perhaps 20, with dark hair and a soft, serious face, wearing a gown the color of deep rose. She was beautiful in the unremarkable way that real people are beautiful, not the idealized way of formal portraits. There was a slight asymmetry to her smile, a small mark, a birthmark, Wren realized, leaning closer, just below her left ear, where Wren had a birthmark, the same shape, the same size, the same place. She stood very still for a long moment, the portrait in her hands, her own reflection faintly visible in the glass over the painted face, and felt the floor of the room tilt very slightly, the way a floor tilts when you have stood up too quickly. She set the portrait down carefully. She looked around the room with new eyes. On the writing desk, beneath the portrait, was a small stack of letters tied with ribbon. The top letter was addressed, in the same faded ink as the envelope that had contained the key, to a name Wren had never heard before. My dearest Seraphina. If you're enjoying this one so far, this is exactly the moment to subscribe to the Duke Obsession. We post a new story like this every week, hidden rooms, hidden names, and the secrets that great houses keep behind locked doors. Hit subscribe now so the next one finds you, and stay with us,
because what Wren found in that desk was only the beginning. Wren did not read the letters that day. She told herself this was caution. In truth, it was fear. The specific fear of a person who has found a thread and suspects that pulling it will unravel everything they believe about themselves. She locked the room again. She returned the key to her apron pocket. She finished her work for the day with hands that were not entirely steady. And that night, in the narrow bed she shared with Bess, the scullery maid, in the servants' quarters under the eaves, she did not sleep. My dearest Seraphina. She did not know anyone named Seraphina. She had never heard the name spoken in the house, in the village, anywhere. But the portrait, the birthmark, the room kept, not in mourning, but in waiting, for when you are ready. She returned to the room the following Thursday. This time she sat at the writing desk and untied the ribbon and read. The letters were from the late Duchess, Alaric's mother, Wren understood from the signature, Margaret Vane, Duchess of Calderwood, written over perhaps 2 years to a woman named Seraphina Hale. The early letters were warm, full of small domestic detail, descriptions of the gardens, news of the estate, affectionate inquiries after someone's health. They read like letters between close friends or perhaps sisters. Then, part-way through the stack, the tone changed. One letter, dated some 20 years earlier, began without its usual warmth. Seraphina, I have done as you asked, though it breaks something in me to do it. The child is settled with the Reverend and his wife in Linmere. They are good people and will raise her with love, though they will never know what she truly is or what she came from. I have left the locket as you instructed. It is the only thing of yours I could not bring myself to withhold from her entirely, whatever the danger in it. You asked me never to write of this again, and I will honor that. But I want you to know, wherever you are, whatever has driven you to this, I do not believe you were wrong to choose her safety over everything else. I only grieve that it cost you the choice of ever knowing her. Burn this letter if you wish. I am keeping my copy, because someday, if God is kind, there may be a reason for someone to know the truth, and I find I cannot bear for there to be no record at all that you existed and that you loved her, even from this distance. Your friend, always, Margaret. Wren did not read the letters 3 times. The child is settled with the Reverend and his wife in Linmere. The locket, they will never know what she truly is or what she came from. She reached into the collar of her dress and drew out the small silver locket she had worn every day of her life, the only item that had come with her from the rectory doorstep, the only connection to a past that she had never been able to trace. She opened it, empty as it had always been, just the worn initial inside the clasp. W. Not for Wren. She understood, sitting in that locked room with the afternoon light fading through the curtains, that the letter had been wrong about one thing. The initial was not the beginning of her name.
It was the end of someone else's. Seraphina. Wren did not sleep again that night. She lay in the narrow bed beside Bess and turned the locket over and over in her fingers and tried to make sense of a story that kept reshaping itself every time she examined it. A woman named Seraphina Hale, who had been close enough to the Duchess of Calderwood to write to her as a friend. A child, settled 20 years ago with the Reverend and his wife in Linmere, the same year Wren had been born. A locket left behind, engraved with an initial that was not a first name, but a last one. Hale. Wren Hale. She said it quietly to herself in the dark, testing the shape of it, and felt something in her chest that she could not name, not quite recognition, because she did not know this person, this Seraphina, at all,
but something adjacent to recognition, the feeling of a key fitting a lock you did not know was there. Why had she been given away? What had she been protected from? And why had the Duchess of Calderwood kept a room for her, locked and waiting, for 11 years after her own death, with a key arranged to be delivered at exactly the right moment? The right moment, Wren understood slowly, must have been arranged. Someone had decided when the key would be sent. Someone had kept the room polished, the flowers fresh, for 11 years after the Duchess's death, which meant someone living, someone in this house, knew exactly what was in that room and exactly who it was for. There was only one person with both the authority and the motive to arrange such a thing. The next morning, Wren found Mrs. Pratt in the linen room and asked her, as steadily as she could manage, who had access to the third-floor corridor. Mrs. Pratt did not look up from the sheets she was folding. She said only, "His Grace and myself, and now apparently you." Wren said, "You knew about the key?" Mrs. Pratt set down the sheet. She looked at Wren for a long moment, the same look she had given her on the first day, Wren realized now. Not suspicion, recognition. Mrs. Pratt had known from the very first interview exactly who Wren was. Mrs. Pratt said, "I have worked in this house for 30 years, child. I was here when the Duchess, God rest her, asked me to keep that room exactly as it was, no matter how long it took, until the day came that the key could be sent." She paused. "I did not know when that day would come. His Grace decides such things now." Wren said, "His Grace." Mrs. Pratt said, "You should speak with him." She picked up another sheet and resumed folding, and Wren understood that this was the end of the conversation, but also, somehow, the beginning of the next one. Wren had never, in 11 months, set foot in the Duke's private study. It sat at the end of the ground-floor east wing, behind a heavy oak door, and was understood among the staff to be a room one entered only when summoned, and even then with some trepidation. Wren knocked. There was a pause. Then his voice, "Come." She entered. The Duke was at his desk, a ledger open before him, a single lamp lit against the gray afternoon. He looked up, and for the second time in 11 months, something in his face went very still when he saw her. He said, "Miss Ashby." She said, "Your Grace, I am sorry to intrude. I have received this key last week. I have been into the room on the 3rd floor." He did not move. He did not ask which room. He knew exactly which room. He said, "I see." She said, "I found letters from the Duchess, your mother, to a woman named Seraphina Hale." Something crossed his face at the name. Grief, she thought, or something adjacent to it. He said, "Sit down, Miss Ashby, please." She sat. He closed the ledger. For a long moment he said nothing, and Wren had the sense of watching a man finally, after some great length of time, decide to set down something he had been carrying. He said, "Seraphina Hale was my mother's closest friend. They grew up together in this county before either of them married." He paused. He paused too, choosing words with the care of someone who had rehearsed this conversation many times in his head and was discovering that the rehearsal had not prepared him for the reality of it. He said, "Seraphina married badly, a man named Edmund Hale, wealthy, well-connected, and by every private account, cruel. The marriage was arranged when she was very young, and by the time anyone understood what kind of man he was, it was too late to undo it." He said, 20 years ago, Seraphina gave birth to a daughter, and within a year of that daughter's birth, Seraphina disappeared." Wren said, "Disappeared?" He said the official account given by Edmund Hale was that she had died of a fever while traveling. There was a funeral, a grave in the Hale family plot with her name on the stone. He paused. My mother never believed it. She believed Serafina had fled, that she had discovered something about her husband, something dangerous, and had run, and had been unable to take her daughter with her without being found. He looked at Wren. He said, my mother helped arrange it. The Reverend and his wife in Linmere were good people, and they were far enough from the Hale estate to be safe, and close enough that my mother could watch in whatever small way she was able, from a distance. Wren said, and the locket?
He said, the only thing Serafina insisted on. She would not let the child go with nothing. My mother always believed it was Serafina's way of leaving a door open, in case someday, somehow, the truth could be told. Wren said, did she ever find out, Serafina? Did she ever find out what happened to her daughter? The Duke was quiet for a long moment. He said, my mother received one letter years later from an address she did not recognize, with no return address and no signature. It said only... He stopped. He opened a drawer in his desk and withdrew a single folded paper, worn soft with handling, and passed it across to her. Wren unfolded it. The handwriting was different from the Duchess's, smaller, more hurried, as though written quickly and in fear of being found doing it. It said, Margaret, I cannot write more than this. Tell her, if you ever can, that I did not leave because I did not want her. Tell her I have thought of her every day. Tell her the locket was my mother's and her mother's before that, and that it belongs to her, and so does everything else, whenever it is safe for her to have it. There was no signature. There did not need to be one. Wren sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. She said, finally, why now? The room has been waiting 11 years. Why did the key come now? The Duke said, my mother left instructions. She knew she was dying. It was not sudden, despite what the household believed. She had perhaps a year to prepare. In that year, she wrote everything down, where the letters were, what they meant, and she left instructions that the key was to be sent only when... He paused, and for the first time in the conversation, something in his composure cracked, just slightly. Only when the person it was intended for had come to this house on their own, without being summoned, without anyone arranging it. He said, my mother believed that if Serafina's daughter was ever to learn the truth, it should not be because someone came looking for her and found her. It should be because she had, in some way, found her own way home first, without knowing it, and then the truth could be given to her, not imposed on her. He said, when you arrived 11 months ago, asking for work, with a name I did not recognize and a face that I recognized immediately, he stopped. Wren said, you recognized me? He said, I have seen the portrait in that room every day of my life. I would know that face anywhere. He said, I went to my mother's papers that night. I found the instructions. I found the key. And then I waited, because that was what she had asked. 11 months, Miss Ashby. I have walked past you in corridors and sat at tables you served and said nothing, because my mother believed, and I came to believe, that you deserved to find this on your own terms, in your own time, and not because a duke decided it was time for you to know. Wren said, and if I had never gone into that room? He said, then you would have lived your whole life never knowing, and I would have honored that too. It was never going to be my choice to make for you. The room was very quiet. Wren said, my mother, Serafina, is there any way to know if she is... He said gently, I do not know, Miss Ashby. The letter is the last anyone heard.
My mother spent years making careful, quiet inquiries and found nothing more. He paused. I am sorry. I wish I had a better answer. Wren looked down at the locket in her hands, at the worn initial, at the letter from a woman she had never met, in fear, asking only that her daughter someday know she had been loved. She said, "What happens now?" The Duke said, "That is entirely yours to decide." What happened next was not, in the end, Wren's decision alone, though it began with her. She decided, after several days of consideration, that she did not want the truth to live only in a locked room and a private conversation. Her mother had spent her life hidden, erased, written out of her own story by a cruel man and a false grave. Wren had spent her life not knowing her own name. She did not want to disappear into a quiet arrangement, however kind. She wanted the truth said where it could be heard. The Duke, when she told him this, did not argue. He said, "Then we will do it properly." He paused. "There is a matter of the Hale estate, Miss Ashby. Edmund Hale died some years ago, without other heirs. The estate has sat in legal limbo since, administered by trustees, because no living relative of Seraphina Hale could be located." He looked at her. "You are not only her daughter, you are, as far as any solicitor in England is concerned, the last of the Hale line." Wren said, "I do not want his estate. I never knew him. I do not want anything that was his." The Duke said, "Then we will find a way to ensure it goes where Seraphina would have wanted it to go. And I suspect, from everything my mother wrote of her, that Seraphina would have wanted it to go towards exactly the kind of place that raised you, the rectory, the parish, the people who gave you a home when she could not." It was, in the end, at a quiet gathering at Calderwood Manor, not a grand ball, but a dinner held for the parish and the local gentry, the kind of evening Wren had served at a dozen times without being seen. The Duke stood. The room, expecting some ordinary announcement about the estate or the harvest, fell into its usual polite attention. He said, "Before this evening concludes, I want to tell you about a woman named Seraphina Hale, whom many of the older among you may remember and whose story has been wrongly told for 20 years. He told it, all of it, the cruel marriage, the false grave, the daughter given away in secret to protect her, the locket, the room kept for 11 years. And then he said, "That daughter has been in this house for nearly a year. She has cleaned these rooms, served this table, and walked these halls, and every one of you has looked past her the way the world looked past her mother." He turned. He said, "Miss Wren Ashby, Miss Wren Hale, would you join me?" The room turned, every face, the way Wren had imagined in her worst moments a room turning on her, except that what she saw was not mockery, was not the cruel attention she had feared. It was something closer to wonder. Several of the older guests, people who had known the county for decades, were looking at her with expressions of dawning emotional recognition, several already reaching for handkerchiefs.
An elderly woman near the front, Lady Osmond, who Wren recognized vaguely as a friend of the late Duchess, rose unsteadily to her feet and said, in a voice thick with feeling, "You have her eyes, Seraphina's eyes. I have not seen eyes like that in 20 years." Wren stood. She crossed the room, the longest walk of her life and the shortest, and stood beside the Duke, who did not take her hand, but stood close enough that the gesture itself said what needed saying. He said, quietly, to her alone, "You do not have to say anything." She said, "I want to." She turned to the room. She said, "My whole life I believed I came from nowhere, a locket with no name, a doorstep, a kindness I could never trace back to its source." She said,
I know now that I came from a woman who loved me enough to give me away, who spent the rest of her life, wherever she is, whatever became of her, hoping that someday I would know that. She said, I do now. The room was silent. Then, somewhere near the back, someone began to applaud, quietly at first, and then the whole room, and Wren stood in the candlelight of a house she had cleaned in silence for 11 months, no longer invisible, no longer nameless, and felt something settle into place that she had carried, without knowing its shape, for her entire life. The Hale estate, once the legal questions were resolved, was used, at Wren's direction and with the Duke's full support, to establish a fund for the rectory at Linmere and for children in the parish who, like Wren, found themselves without family and without means. It was named, on Wren's insistence, not for the Hale family. It was named the Seraphina Fund. The room on the 3rd floor was no longer locked. Wren visited it often, not as a maid now, but as the only person alive who could look at the portrait of the woman in the rose-colored gown and see, in the asymmetry of the smile and the small mark below the left ear, her own reflection looking back. She kept the locket. She had a second portrait commissioned, of herself, in a gown the same shade of rose, and hung it beside the first, so that mother and daughter, separated by 20 years and a falsified grave and a lifetime of not knowing, finally shared a wall, a room, a house. As for the Duke, Alaric Vane, who had walked past her in corridors for 11 months with a secret he had carried out of respect rather than coldness, the relationship that grew between them was not sudden, and was not in the beginning spoken of as anything other than friendship. But Mrs. Pratt, who had kept the house's secrets for 30 years and had a sharper eye than anyone gave her credit for, observed to Bess the scullery maid one evening, watching the Duke walk Wren through the gardens in the last light of a summer evening, that she had known, the very first day, exactly who that girl was. "And you know?" Bess asked. "Did it end like this, too?" Mrs. Pratt considered the two figures in the garden, unhurried, easy with each other, the Duke saying something that made Wren laugh, a sound Mrs. Pratt realized she had never once heard in 11 months until that summer. She said, "I hoped it would." A locked room, a faded key, a locket with no name. For 11 years, Calderwood Manor kept a promise made by a dying woman to a friend she had lost, that her daughter would not be told who she was, but would be allowed to find it, in her own time, on her own terms, without anyone deciding what the truth was worth. Wren Ashby had spent her life believing she came from nowhere. She had been wrong. She had come from a room with the curtains drawn and the flowers always fresh, waiting, patiently, faithfully, for the Thursday she was finally ready to open the door. If this story moved you, subscribe to the Duke Obsession right now. Every week we bring you a brand new story of hidden rooms, hidden names, and the truths that great houses keep waiting until the right person is ready to find them. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you found a locked room with your own face inside it? Until next time, remember, some doors are not locked to keep you out. They are locked until you are ready to walk in.